Tourism transport causes about 75% of tourism's carbon dioxide emissions. As global tourism statistics do not provide transport data, we developed the tourism transport distance model. This model is based on UNWTO and socioeconomic data. And the results show clearly that the division over trips per transport mode differs quite a lot from that over distances and emissions. For instance, aviation takes 25% of all trips, but it causes 74% of all emissions. From the graph to the right, you can see that particularly international air travel caused the growth of emissions. Of all emissions to the destinations, 95% are caused by tourism to developed countries. That's the green part of the graph. Only 2.9% is caused by tourism to small island developing states. And mind that most of these SIDS are not least developed states. For the least developed states, this share is only 2.4%. Some of the LDCs and SIDs depend highly on tourism, so therefore mitigation strategies potentially can cause climate justice issues. However, the small shares of emissions provide ample room for a fair mitigation policy. The future of tourism emissions is shown in this graph. The black line shows the business as usual case. The red line shows what we need if we want a 1.5 degree Celsius scenario. And the yellow line shows a tourism decarbonization scenario, which has the following characteristics. The revenues, the trips and the guest nights will develop as in business as usual. But for air travel growth, there needs to be a restriction until 2050. And it requires full electrification of accommodation, car and other transport, 100% synthetic e-fuels in aviation, and a fair international agreement on limiting airport capacity growth. The main findings about transport and emissions are that the transport emissions increased with 65% between 1995 and 2019. Rail is the big opportunity with fast growth already in Europe, Asia and North Africa, and the lowest energy use per passenger kilometer. And for the car, electrification and renewables are the essential solutions. Thank you very much.
Next, I would like to give you some information about global tourism carbon emissions. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the world sees about 1 billion international visits, along with a much larger scale of domestic travel. If we put everything together and count the emissions of transport, accommodation, food, recreational activities, and shopping together, this makes tourism a major contributor to the global greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, the sectors produce around 4.1 gigatons to 5.4 gigatons of emissions at a given year, and this constitutes around 8 to 11% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Most emissions are produced by tourists coming from high-income countries at the destinations of high-income status. Tourism is also carbon intensive, so if we want to earn $1 spending from the sectors, we will produce 1.0 kilograms of carbon emissions. This ratio is about 20% higher than the manufacturing sectors and 30% higher than the construction sectors. We also observe that tourism carbon emissions has continued to grow in the past decade, and the expansion rate is around 2.5 to 3.3% per year. And this is in a direct opposite to the 7% emissions reductions that's required to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So far we are seeing the global pattern, but even at the individual countries, similar trend was observed. So far, no country was able to decrease their tourism carbon emissions while growing their visitor numbers or receipts. So what are the fundamental issues that we observe here? We think that the technology improvement rate of the sectors is simply too slow to keep up with the tourism demand. Currently, across all tourism sectors, technology or efficiency improves at 2% per year. So if right now the tourists increase by more than 2%, this means the business will need additional energy to produce the additional goods and services. As a result, the carbon emissions increase. So overall, we feel that the slow technology uptake of the sectors and the unsustainable rapid growth of tourism are the two fundamental causes of this problem. Thank you.
Nisambulo Vinaka, and warm Pacific greetings to you all. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be able to shed some light on two key findings that emerged from the Tourism Panel on Climate Change Stocktake Report. In general, I wish to draw our attention to two key findings, which are findings number 8 and findings number 24, which speak to the inequities and inequalities that exist within the tourism climate change spectrum. The Stocktake report reaffirms the notion and the general understanding that we have that global tourism emissions are heavily concentrated in a few high-income outbound markets and destinations. As a citizen of the Global South and an indigenous Pacific Islander, the Stocktake report points to the importance of seeking out more equitable relationships and equitable solutions to the climate crisis. The unequal distribution of tourism emissions and potential mitigation strategies have important climate justice implications. While the tourism and climate justice space is relatively new and unexplored, there are significant discussions and conversations that need to be held to strengthen relationships and improve equality within the tourism emission and mitigation strategy space. While saying that, it's also important to acknowledge that there are significant gaps between the global north and the global south in terms of research and scientific capacity. There are significant gaps, particularly in the global south's highly vulnerable countries and regions. So the Stocktake report, while highlighting many findings, I feel it's important for me as a Pacific Islander to identify and highlight that relationships need to be improved and the gaps between the global north and south need to be closed. And the Stocktake report also stresses that there is a need for a whole of sector leadership. That is what is required for tourism emissions to peak and decline substantially by the end of the decade. So what then can we do? What does the Stocktake report give for decision makers? What does it provide us? Well, in short, the report, in essence and spirit, encourages us to rediscover our relationships with each other and with nature, and that tourism should be a platform for climate action and help reinforce our roles as responsible custodians of the planet. Tourism has the potential, when done right, to realize these aspirations.
Good afternoon or good evening, dear participants. This is Anu Kumari Lama, working as tourism specialist at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. This talk highlights some of the key findings and the insights related to climate risk interactions in mountain destinations, particularly looking from the Hindu Kush Himalayan region's perspective. The Hindu Kush Himalayan region is one of the world's largest, the richest, but also the most fragile mountain ecosystems of the world. It is the global tourism hotspots, having some of the most iconic mountain destinations that attracts millions of tourists in the region. Tourism has a very special place in our region as it contributes to sustainable mountain development, particularly looking from the perspective of reducing poverty, bringing wider economic growth, and also generating investments. However, the mountain destinations are also facing multiple climate change impacts and complex interactions. In particular, the tourism development pathways coupled with the climate change impacts are resulting cascading tourism and climate risks in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. And this is increasing the vulnerability of the people, the tourism industry, the economy, as well as the region. And therefore, we need strong policy actions and investments to build the resilience of the people, the economy, and tourism in the region. And some of the regional and national policies like Moving Mountain 2030 Strategy, Nepal's National Adaptation Plan, and Bhutan's Tourism Revive Act are important provisions in promoting climate actions in the region. We need to really focus one important fact that given the current crisis in generating enough investment in low-income countries, tourism serves as an important catalytic agent to leverage required investment, particularly those investment going to clean energy, water security, capacity building, technology transfer, etc., are important in this regard. So what we can say that, the key message going out from this exercise is that we need to promote integrated approach, addressing the risks generated from multiple climate and tourism risks. But this needs to be supported through a strong policy actions that attracts investment for climate resilient tourism development in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. Thank you.